This, again, is over one particular year. There's no guarantee that Microsoft returns are going to continue to be stationary in any year afterwards, possibly in years before. We can go and check that since we have past data, but none of us can actually see the future, so we won't stress about the future. So the definition of co-integration specifically, and why we care about it, is that if you have some set of integrated of order 1 time series, if you can create a linear combination of those integrated of order 1 time series, such that the linear combination is stationary, that set is co-integrated. So basically what I'm saying is I have a bunch of price series. If I can add them and subtract them and multiply them by some constant value and pop them all together, I can get something stationary out of the end of it. I'm explaining the non-stationarity of some time series with the non-stationarity of some other time series. And this is a very difficult relationship to kind of explain. It's a very difficult relationship to find, right? It's hard enough to find one time series that's stationary, one return time series that's stationary, unless you pick a particular year. So it's going to be significantly harder to find some set, or in our specific case, a pair of integrated of order 1 time series that is stationary together, right? Because that's a weird, subtle sort of relationship. And unless there's a reasonable reason for why the non-stationarity of one, why the randomness inherent in one time series would explain the randomness of another time series, well, then we have no reason to believe that it's going to continue to be so, right? So we want to start with some reasonable economic basis. We want some reason for why we would explore a particular pair or explore a particular set of price series. Maybe this is based on a joint relationship on some element. They're in the same sector. One company is eyeing a competitor of the other for a merger. Whatever. As long as there's a reasonable basis for us to be testing and trying to find this relationship, we can kind of narrow the search space in hopes that we can actually find a legitimate co-integrated relationship. So, in our particular case, I said we're going to be dealing with just a pair of things. So, all that we want is that we can take one price series and some other price series and buy one or two or however so many of one or the other, and buy some and short the other. And this should create a stationary spread. And let's say this is an example where we have y equals 2x, right? Or y equals some alpha plus 2x. Or we can buy one instance of something and short 2 instances of something else. What we're essentially doing is we're taking out a hedge, right? We buy 1 unit of y, we short 2 units of x. We're hedging the nonsense of y with the nonsense of x and getting a stationary time series out of it. And whenever we're doing any sort of algorithmic trading, everything kind of comes down to making a bet. And in the case where we have a stationary time series, well, then that means we can calculate the mean and the standard deviation, provided that it's normal in this particular case, right? We'll just roll with a normal distribution. But if you have the mean and standard deviation of the normal distribution, then based on what the current value of that time series, of that spread is, we can make a bet as to whether it's going to revert or not to the mean. Now, in this particular case, we don't have like a time model of when something will revert. We just know, well, we just have a notion of whether something is stationary or not. So whether something is drawn from the same probability distribution or not. So we'd just be making bets and ideally include in our logic some notion of whether we revert or not. There are other sorts of metrics that you can use, like the Hurst exponent, or like if we were to fit like an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process or some specific model that models mean reversion. That would give us a sort of time notion of when something is going to revert. In this particular case, this is not built in. So let's make some simulated data before we come up with another example from the stock market over a particular set of years that has co-integration. So I'll generate x1 and x2, and I'll say, hey, I have x1, it's some samples from a random normal, and x2 is that plus a little bit of noise.
Can you suggest that what frequency do you use when you trade co-integration?
It depends on the relationship. Sometimes a daily basis makes sense. It depends on over what time range a